August 19th, 1942, before dawn. The French coast at Dieppe is barely visible through low cloud and sea mist. Dark silhouettes of landing craft cut through the water, engines throttled down, metal hulls knocking softly as waves push them forward. Inside, men sit packed shoulder to shoulder, weapons across their knees, helmets pulled low. Most of them are Canadian. Many of them have never been in combat. If this landing fails, they will not retreat quietly. They will die on an open beach in full view of the enemy, with nowhere to hide. And if it succeeds, the Allies will learn how to invade Europe. There is no middle ground. The plan looks simple on paper. A sudden amphibious raid. Land at Dieppe, seize the port, destroy key installations, gather intelligence, and withdraw before German reinforcements can respond in force. In reality, almost every assumption behind the plan is wrong. The beach is narrow. The town rises steeply behind it. The shingle is deep enough to trap vehicles. The cliffs overlook everything, and the Germans are not surprised. They are waiting. The men in the landing craft do not know that yet. They feel the cold spray. They smell fuel, oil, sweat. The engines idle. Someone checks his watch by feel, because light is forbidden. The idea is speed, shock, confusion. Get in, hit hard, get out. The kind of operation that looks decisive from headquarters and survivable only from a distance. For the Canadians, Dieppe is not an experiment. It is their war. When the first shots crack across the water, the illusion collapses instantly. Tracer fire reaches out from the shore, ripping through the mist. Machine guns open up from positions that were supposed to be neutralized. Searchlights cut across the beach, locking onto the landing craft as if they had been expected all along. Ramps drop. Men run forward into fire they cannot return effectively. Some fall before they reach dry ground. Others reach the beach and discover there is nowhere to go. The shingle shifts underfoot, slowing every movement. Bullets snap overhead and into bodies. Wounded men scream and cannot be dragged away because there is no cover. Tanks that were supposed to support the infantry grind forward and immediately bog down, tracks spinning uselessly in loose stone. Some never even make it off the craft before being hit. Within minutes, the landing is no longer an assault. It is a trap. German defenders fire calmly from concrete positions built exactly for this purpose. They do not need to maneuver. They do not need to guess. Every approach is exposed. Every movement is visible. The beach becomes a killing ground where bravery changes nothing and hesitation changes even less. Communications break down almost immediately. Units lose cohesion. Orders cannot be passed forward or backward. Smoke meant to obscure movement drifts uselessly. Naval gunfire support is limited and inaccurate. Air support is present but cannot suppress defenders who are protected by terrain and fortifications. Men are pinned in place, pressed flat against the stones, counting seconds between bursts of fire, knowing that standing up means dying. Some try anyway. By mid-morning, the reality is undeniable. The port cannot be taken. The defenses are intact. Casualties are catastrophic. Evacuation becomes the priority, but evacuation under fire is slower and more dangerous than landing. Craft that come in to pull men off the beach are hit. Some turn back half empty, others are destroyed outright. Those who cannot be evacuated are trapped. They fight until ammunition runs low, until wounds make movement impossible, until officers realize there is no tactical value left in continuing. Surrender comes not as relief, but as the only alternative to annihilation. By the time the raid ends, the numbers are staggering. Of the roughly 6,000 Allied troops involved, more than half are killed, wounded, or captured. Canadian units are shattered. Entire companies cease to exist as organized formations. The beach at Dieppe is littered with wrecked equipment, burned vehicles, bodies that cannot be recovered. From a purely military standpoint, it is a disaster. From a political standpoint, it is a shock. And from a strategic standpoint, it becomes something else entirely. Because what Dieppe proves, with brutal clarity, is what will not work. It proves that you cannot seize a heavily defended port head-on. That landing directly in front of intact fortifications is suicide. that tanks cannot operate on shingle beaches without preparation, that air power alone cannot suppress well-prepared coastal defenses, that naval gunfire must be heavier, more accurate, and coordinated, that intelligence gaps cost lives immediately. Every failure at Dieppe leaves a mark. The Allies study the wreckage not to justify the raid, but to dissect it. They analyze where men died and why. They catalog the terrain, the timings, the breakdowns. They realize that almost every assumption made in planning was optimistic at best and fatal at worst. And they do something critical. They do not repeat it. When planning for a full-scale invasion of France begins in earnest, Dieppe is always present in the room, even when no one mentions it. The lessons are uncomfortable, but unavoidable. Ports will not be seized on day one. Artificial harbors will be built instead. Beaches will be chosen for accessibility, not convenience. Intelligence will be deeper. Deception will be broader. Firepower will be overwhelming. The cost of ignoring Dieppe is measured in blood that has already been paid. For the men who survived and for the families of those who did not, that knowledge offers little comfort. The raid is remembered as a failure, and rightly so. It does not liberate territory. It does not weaken German defenses. It does not change the front lines. But it changes the war. 2 years later, when Allied troops land in Normandy, they do not land in front of a port. They land on open beaches, chosen precisely because Dieppe showed what happens when you don't. They bring specialized armor designed to deal with obstacles and terrain. They arrive under a weight of naval and air bombardment far beyond anything attempted in 1942. They accept that the first day will be costly, but they plan for survival after it. D-Day succeeds not because it avoids risk, but because it avoids Dieppe. The men who died on that beach in 1942 never see that outcome. Their raid is labeled a failure in official histories, a footnote compared to the landings that follow. But the invasion of Normandy is built on their loss. Every adjustment, every caution, every refusal to repeat a mistake traces back to that morning at Dieppe. The raid does not save Europe by itself. It saves Europe by teaching the Allies how not to try. And when the beaches of Normandy are finally secured and the invasion holds instead of collapsing, it is because the cost of learning was already paid, early, brutally, and in full view of the enemy. Dieppe is remembered as a failure, but without it, D-Day almost certainly would have been one too. The difference is that Dieppe fails loudly. It fails in daylight, in front of cameras, in front of German defenses that remain standing when the smoke clears. The enemy does not need to guess what happened. They see it. They film it. They analyze it too. For Germany, Dieppe is proof that the Atlantic Wall works, that coastal fortifications can stop an invasion cold, that Allied forces, when forced into a frontal assault, bleed like anyone else. That confidence matters because it shapes German thinking in the years that follow. Ports are reinforced even further. Beaches near major harbors are treated as likely targets. The assumption hardens that any serious invasion will require capturing a port immediately because armies cannot be supplied over open beaches. Dieppe does not just teach the Allies what not to do. It teaches the Germans what to expect. And that expectation becomes another vulnerability. For the Allies, the memory of Dieppe never fades. It is cited in planning documents. It is referenced in arguments. It ends discussions. When someone proposes landing directly at a port, Dieppe ends the conversation. When someone suggests lighter naval fire to preserve infrastructure, Dieppe is the counter-argument. When optimism creeps in, Dieppe is the reminder. This is how failed operations shape wars, not by what they achieve, but by what they forbid. The men who plan D-Day carry Dieppe with them into every decision. They remember the way tanks stalled on shingle, so they design tanks specifically to survive beaches. They remember infantry pinned without cover, so they plan overwhelming preliminary fire. They remember communications collapsing, so they build redundancy into everything. They remember evacuation under fire, so they accept that withdrawal will not be an option. Normandy is not planned as a raid, it is planned as an occupation from the first hour. That distinction exists because Dieppe made retreat look like what it really is under fire: chaos. By 1944, the Allies no longer believe in quick strikes against fortified Europe. They believe in grinding inevitability, in logistics, in redundancy, in absorbing losses without losing momentum. That mindset is born not from victory, but from failure, and Dieppe is the failure that forces it. For the soldiers who fought there, this strategic clarity comes too late. Prisoners spend years in camps. Wounded men carry injuries home that never fully heal. Families receive notifications that offer no explanation beyond "killed in action." There is no sense that their loss unlocked anything, only that it happened and could not be undone. History supplies the connection later. When Normandy holds, when the beachheads expand instead of collapsing, when German counterattacks arrive too late and with too little force, the difference is invisible to most of the men fighting. They do not know which decisions were shaped by Dieppe. They only know that this time the invasion does not stall at the waterline. That is the real legacy of Dieppe, not redemption, but prevention. It prevents the Allies from repeating a mistake at a scale that would have ended the war in the West before it began. It strips away illusions about speed, surprise, and surgical strikes. It replaces them with an understanding that invading Europe will be slow, brutal, and unimaginably expensive, and that anything less than total commitment will fail. Dieppe answers the question the Allies were afraid to ask, and the answer is unacceptable. So they change everything. They wait, they build, they plan for 2 more years. And when they finally return to the French coast, they do so with an invasion designed not to succeed brilliantly, but to survive long enough that failure is no longer an option. What Dieppe removes more than anything else is the illusion of control. Before 1942, there is still a belief among Allied planners that a well-timed strike, executed with enough courage and surprise, might crack Fortress Europe. That belief dies on the shingle. At Dieppe, courage is abundant. Surprise exists briefly. Neither is enough. The enemy does not panic. The defenses do not crumble. The system absorbs the blow and keeps functioning. That realization is devastating and necessary. From that point on, Allied planning shifts away from elegance and toward excess. If the enemy cannot be shocked into collapse, then he must be overwhelmed so completely that collapse becomes unavoidable. That means more ships than seem reasonable, more aircraft than can be coordinated comfortably, more artillery than planners initially want to request, and above all, more time spent preparing than anyone on the political side likes to hear. Dieppe makes delay acceptable. It gives planners the evidence they need to say no. No to early landings, no to shortcuts, no to underpowered operations designed to look decisive rather than be decisive. When pressure comes to do something now, Dieppe is the answer. Something was done, and it failed. The Germans, meanwhile, draw their own conclusions. They interpret Dieppe as confirmation that the Allies will need a port, that ports are the key objective, that any serious landing will announce itself by going straight for infrastructure. As a result, German defenses harden around the places Dieppe taught them to expect danger. That misreading is critical, because when the Allies return in 1944, they do not come for a port. They come for beaches that cannot support a harbor, until the Allies bring their own. They land where German planners believe logistics will fail, because Dieppe taught everyone the wrong lesson for the wrong reasons. The failure cuts both ways. This is the uncomfortable truth about Dieppe. It helps both sides, but it helps the Allies more. The Germans learn how strong their defenses are. The Allies learn how strong they must become. One lesson reinforces confidence. The other destroys complacency. In war, those outcomes are not equal. By the time Operation Overlord is finalized, there is no debate left about scale. The invasion will not be tested. It will not probe. It will not withdraw. It will arrive with enough force that even if parts of it fail, and planners expect that some will, the whole cannot be stopped. That thinking is born directly out of Dieppe. The raid becomes the reference point for everything the invasion is not allowed to be: not rushed, not undergunned, not dependent on capturing a port intact, not vulnerable to being pinned at the waterline with no way forward. When Allied troops step onto the beaches of Normandy, they carry more than weapons and equipment. They carry the weight of a previous failure that showed exactly how quickly an invasion can collapse if it is not planned for survival beyond the first hours. Dieppe collapses in the first hours. Normandy is designed so it cannot. That difference is not accidental, it is learned, and it is paid for by men who never get the chance to see the lesson applied. The raid at Dieppe is not redeemed by later success. Nothing redeems it. But it is not meaningless. It is the point where theory meets reality and loses decisively enough that no one is willing to gamble again. When D-Day finally comes, the Allies do not believe it will be clean or cheap. They believe only one thing with certainty, that repeating Dieppe on a larger scale would be catastrophic. So they build an invasion that accepts chaos, absorbs losses, and keeps moving forward even when parts of it break. That is what Dieppe teaches, not how to win, but how not to lose everything in a single morning. And that understanding settles into Allied planning like a permanent scar. Every time someone suggests reducing bombardment to preserve buildings, Dieppe answers back. Every time someone argues that surprise alone will be enough, Dieppe stands in the way. Every time political pressure demands action before preparation is complete, Dieppe is the reminder of what happens when men are sent ashore with hope instead of inevitability. The raid becomes a negative blueprint, not something to emulate, but something to design against. What is rarely acknowledged is how close the Allies come, even after Dieppe, to forgetting its lessons. In 1943, impatience grows. The Soviet Union is bleeding on the Eastern Front and demanding a second front now. Public opinion wants action. Politicians want momentum. There is constant pressure to move before everything is ready. And each time, Dieppe is dragged back into the conversation. It is not used rhetorically. It is used clinically. Numbers, distances, casualty rates, photographs of tanks stuck on shingle, timelines showing how quickly fire pinned men in place, evidence that once an assault stalls at the waterline, no amount of courage can restart it. That evidence buys time to build specialized landing craft, time to design armored vehicles for beaches, time to rehearse coordination between sea, air, and land forces until it becomes mechanical. Time to plan deception on a scale that ensures the enemy cannot respond decisively, even if the landing is detected. All of that time is purchased with the blood spent at Dieppe. For Germany, the raid reinforces a different belief, that the Atlantic Wall will work if it is hit directly, that ports are decisive, that invaders must come where infrastructure exists. This belief is comforting. It offers clarity, and clarity, when misplaced, becomes dangerous. Dieppe convinces German planners they have already seen the future, so they prepare for it. They do not expect an invasion that rejects ports entirely. They do not expect artificial harbors. They do not expect an assault designed to survive weeks without established facilities. They expect Dieppe again, larger, louder, but fundamentally similar. That expectation shapes deployments, and expectations, once set, are hard to dislodge. When the invasion finally comes in June 1944, it does not resemble Dieppe at all. It avoids ports. It spreads across beaches. It arrives with overwhelming firepower. It accepts chaos and damage as inevitable rather than exceptional. It does not depend on speed so much as persistence. The Germans respond the way Dieppe taught them to respond, by waiting for the port seizure that never happens. The contrast is devastating. Dieppe shows the Allies how fragile an invasion is. Normandy shows what happens when that fragility is acknowledged and designed around instead of ignored. The difference between the two is not bravery or sacrifice. Both have plenty of that. The difference is humility. Dieppe humbles the planners, and humbled planners build systems that can survive failure at the tactical level without collapsing strategically. This is why Dieppe cannot be dismissed as a pointless tragedy, even though it is undeniably a tragedy. It is the moment when Allied leadership is forced to accept that invading Europe is not a matter of courage plus opportunity. It is a matter of engineering, logistics, redundancy, and brutal honesty about what will go wrong. Almost everything goes wrong at Dieppe. Enough goes right in Normandy because Dieppe showed what happens when it doesn't. The men who died on that beach are not honored with victory. They are honored with preparation, with restraint, with an invasion delayed until it is ready to endure the worst case, not just hope for the best. In that sense, Dieppe is not a rehearsal. It is a warning. And the Allies listen. That warning reshapes everything the Allies believe about timing. Before Dieppe, there is still faith that speed can compensate for weakness, that moving first, landing fast, and forcing decisions might overwhelm defenses before they fully react. Dieppe proves the opposite. Speed without dominance only delivers men into prepared fire. Surprise lasts minutes. Defenders recover instantly. And once the initiative is lost on a beach, it is almost impossible to regain. From that moment on, Allied planning treats time differently. Time is no longer something to be minimized. It becomes something to be weaponized. More time means more ships, more aircraft, more landing craft, more training cycles, more rehearsals where failure is exposed early instead of paid for later. Dieppe shows that the cost of waiting is political. The cost of rushing is fatal. That distinction matters. In the years that follow, Allied forces conduct countless smaller operations, but none repeat the central mistake of Dieppe. Ports are avoided. Firepower increases. Intelligence becomes obsessive. Deception grows into an entire campaign of its own. Everything is built around the idea that the enemy must not only be surprised, but paralyzed, unsure where to strike, how much force is coming, and when it will arrive. Dieppe also changes how casualties are understood, not as an abstract risk, but as a cascading failure. At Dieppe, losses do not just reduce manpower. They erase momentum. They break coordination. They turn planned actions into isolated acts of survival. The raid shows how quickly an operation can shift from offensive to defensive, and how impossible it is to reverse that shift once it happens. That lesson is brutal, but it is clear. When D-Day is planned, everything is designed to prevent that stall. Beaches are wide enough to absorb chaos. Multiple landing zones ensure that failure in one place does not doom the entire operation. Reserves are planned not as reinforcements for success, but as insurance against disaster. Dieppe teaches the Allies that success is not measured by how perfectly an operation begins. It is measured by how well it survives when it begins to go wrong, and it will go wrong. That assumption that things will fail becomes the foundation of the Normandy landings. It is why planners obsess over redundancy, why they accept damage as inevitable, why they build systems that can continue functioning even when individual units are pinned, destroyed, or cut off. None of that thinking exists before Dieppe. It exists because Dieppe makes the cost of optimism impossible to ignore. For the men who fought there, this strategic evolution offers no comfort. Their experience remains one of confusion, terror, and loss without visible gain. They are not told that their suffering will matter later. They are captured, wounded, buried, or sent home with memories that never align with official explanations. The meaning of Dieppe is assigned afterward. But in war, meaning often arrives too late for those who paid for it. What matters is that the lesson holds. When the Allies finally commit to Normandy, they do so with the full knowledge that even a perfect plan will fracture on contact with reality. They are no longer trying to avoid that fracture. They are trying to ensure it does not become fatal. That shift, from seeking precision to building resilience, is Dieppe's real legacy. And it is a legacy written entirely in failure, a failure so complete that it leaves no room for denial, a failure that forces change, not because it is noble, but because repeating it would end everything. What Dieppe ultimately does is strip war of its illusions. It removes the idea that courage can substitute for preparation. That momentum can substitute for logistics. That speed can substitute for control. On that beach, the Allies learned that modern war punishes assumptions immediately and without mercy. There is no grace period, no adjustment window. If the plan is wrong, men pay for it at once. That knowledge hardens everything that follows. Training becomes harsher. Rehearsals become more brutal. Commanders are forced to confront failure in controlled environments because Dieppe proved what happens when failure is encountered for the first time under fire. Exercises are stopped and restarted not to preserve morale, but to break complacency. Units are pushed until weaknesses surface because hidden weaknesses cost lives later. This is not learning through theory. It is learning through scars. Dieppe also forces the Allies to accept something deeply uncomfortable, that invasion is not an event, but a process. A process that begins long before the first landing craft touches sand and continues long after the first objective is secured. At Dieppe, planners think in terms of hours. At Normandy, they think in terms of weeks. That change in perspective is decisive. At Dieppe, once the initial momentum fails, there is no Plan B. At Normandy, Plan B exists before Plan A even begins. The raid exposes how brittle command structures become when everything depends on perfect timing. Radios fail, smoke drifts the wrong way. Units land late or early. None of these problems are unusual. What Dieppe reveals is how catastrophic they become when the operation cannot absorb them. So the next invasion is built to absorb them, not to prevent chaos, but to survive it. German defenders never fully grasp this shift. They see Dieppe as proof that Allied landings will break under fire, that once pinned, attackers will collapse. That holding strong points is enough to defeat an assault. These conclusions are logical, based on Dieppe, and fatally incomplete. They do not account for an enemy who has learned from failure. They do not account for an invasion that does not depend on speed, surprise, or clean execution, but on endurance and mass. They do not account for an assault designed to keep moving even when large parts of it are failing. Dieppe convinces the Germans they have already seen the worst. Normandy proves they haven't. Between those two moments lies the transformation of Allied thinking, the slow, painful acceptance that Europe cannot be entered lightly, that there is no clever shortcut, that the price will be high no matter what, but that the price of being unprepared is higher still. This is why Dieppe matters, not because it almost worked, but because it made it impossible to believe that something smaller, faster, or cleaner ever could. The raid collapses under fire. The invasion that follows is designed not to collapse at all, and that difference is everything. By the spring of 1944, Dieppe has stopped being a memory and become a constraint. It limits what planners are willing to risk. It closes doors before they are even opened. Every time someone suggests a lighter force, a narrower landing zone, a faster timetable, Dieppe is there, not as a warning spoken aloud, but as a silent boundary no one is willing to cross again. The invasion of Normandy is shaped around one overriding fear, not that it will be costly, but that it might stall. Because Dieppe shows exactly what happens when an invasion stalls. Men are pinned, momentum dies, evacuation becomes impossible, and the operation collapses in plain sight. So Normandy is built to keep moving even when parts of it fail. If one beach struggles, others must succeed. If one unit is pinned, another must break through elsewhere. If the first hours go badly, and planners fully expect they will, the operation must still be able to survive the day. This is the difference Dieppe creates. The Allies no longer ask, "Can we land?" They ask, "What happens if the landing goes wrong?" That question dominates everything. It drives the scale of naval bombardment, the density of air cover, the redundancy of communications, the refusal to depend on a single objective or a single success. By the time Allied troops step onto the beaches in June 1944, they are not executing a daring gamble. They are executing an answer to a failure that proved how little margin for error exists when invading a defended continent. The Germans do not see this answer forming. They remember Dieppe as proof that the Allies cannot break fortified coasts. They believe the next attempt will look the same, only larger. They prepare to fight the last invasion, not the next one. And in that gap, between what Dieppe taught the Allies and what it taught the Germans, the fate of D-Day is decided. Because one side plans around its worst failure, the other plans around its last success. And only one of those approaches survives contact with reality. When the first Allied soldiers step onto the beaches of Normandy on June 6, 1944, nothing feels certain. The sea is rough. Smoke drifts where it shouldn't. Units land in the wrong places. Officers are killed in the opening minutes. Communications fail. Men drown under the weight of their equipment. Entire sectors stall exactly the way Dieppe once stalled, pinned at the waterline, under fire, with nowhere obvious to go. For a moment, history seems ready to repeat itself, and this is where the difference reveals itself. At Dieppe, that moment is the end. At Normandy, it is only the beginning, because everything after that moment has already been designed with failure in mind. There is no expectation that the landing will be clean, no belief that courage alone will break defenses, no illusion that the first wave must succeed perfectly or the operation is lost. Normandy is not built to avoid Dieppe's chaos. It is built to survive it. Men keep landing even when beaches are clogged with wreckage. Naval guns continue firing even when visibility collapses. Engineers clear obstacles under fire because there are replacements behind them. Commanders commit reserves not because the plan is working, but because the plan assumes parts of it won't. That mindset does not exist in 1942. It exists because Dieppe burned it into Allied memory. Every decision at Normandy carries the imprint of that failure, the refusal to rely on a port, the acceptance of massive casualties as a possibility, not a surprise, the insistence on overwhelming firepower, the decision to land everywhere at once, knowing some beaches will bleed while others break through. At Dieppe, the raid collapses when momentum dies. At Normandy, momentum is engineered to be impossible to kill. The Germans fight hard, in some places, brutally well. Omaha Beach looks dangerously close to becoming another Dieppe. Men are pinned, units fragment. Progress is measured in yards paid for with lives. But this time, there is depth behind the assault. Time, resources. The understanding that one beach does not decide the war. That understanding is the true inheritance of Dieppe. It teaches the Allies that an invasion does not fail when things go wrong. It fails when there is nothing left to absorb what goes wrong. Normandy is designed so that failure at the tactical level does not become failure at the strategic level. By the end of D-Day, the beachheads are not elegant. They are not clean. They are not victories in the traditional sense. They are simply there, held at enormous cost, imperfectly connected, dangerously vulnerable. And they do not collapse. That alone marks a turning point. Everything that follows, the buildup, the breakout, the liberation of France, depends on that single fact. The invasion survives its worst day. And it survives because 2 years earlier, another invasion died on a smaller beach under similar fire. The men at Dieppe never get to see this outcome. Their raid remains a failure in every immediate sense. It costs thousands of lives. It achieves none of its stated objectives. It strengthens German confidence and devastates Canadian units. But it removes something far more dangerous than German defenses. It removes Allied self-deception. It forces planners to abandon the fantasy of clean war. It proves that invasion is not about brilliance, but about endurance. Not about shock, but about staying power. Not about getting everything right, but about being prepared when everything goes wrong. Dieppe answers the question the Allies could not afford to get wrong twice, and the answer is brutal. If you land lightly, you die heavily. If you hesitate, you are trapped. If you plan for success alone, you guarantee failure. So the Allies wait. They build. They plan an invasion so large, so redundant, so brutally honest about its own weaknesses that it can survive mistakes that would have ended Dieppe in minutes. When Normandy holds, it is not because the Allies are suddenly smarter or braver. It is because they are finally humble enough to accept what Dieppe taught them at gunpoint, that invading Europe would never be clean, never be quick, never be forgiving. Dieppe is remembered as a disaster, but disasters that are understood change history. Without Dieppe, the Allies might have tried again too soon, too lightly, too confidently, and the beaches of Normandy might have become a larger, bloodier version of the same failure, one with no second chance. The raid at Dieppe does not liberate Europe. It does something quieter and far more important. It makes sure that when the real invasion comes, it does not end in a single morning on the wrong beach.